Hey guys, in this video I'll show you a powerful 1-bar heavy attack Sorcerer DPS build that utilizes subclassing and can parse up to 138k. This build focuses on amplifying heavy attacks with the Surgeon's Mail item set, Rakkhat's Voidmantle Mythic, and then power buff, sourced from the Might of the Guild passive, procced by constantly using Ulfsild's Contingency. It utilizes subclassing to replace a mostly redundant dark magic skill line with much more powerful Assassination. The rotation is based around making the best use of Power Overload ultimate during short periods when enemies are affected with the off-balance debuff, which increases their damage taken from heavy attacks by 70%. You'll be able to find logs from a veteran hard mode Unhallowed grave run I did on PTS in the description. And if you're watching it a few days after this video came out, then I probably already added some trial logs to the website guide. Speaking of which, the build is also on my website, so if you prefer written guides over YouTube videos, you can read it there instead. The link will be in the description. The three skills we're going to use are Sorcerer's Stormcalling, Sorcerer's Daedric Summoning, and Nablet's Assassination. Stormcalling has the Power Overload ultimate, which is crucial for this build, and the Energize passive, which increases shock damage by 5%. Daedric Summoning has pets, but what's also very important, the Power Stone passive, which reduces the cost of ultimates by 50%, which brings down the cost of Power Overload from 25 down to 21, which actually ends up increasing our DPS by a lot. And then Assassination has lots of extremely powerful passives, and we can also backbar the Relentless Focus ability for free 400 weapon and spell damage, because this is a 1-bar build. Moving on to skills. This is the base setup that will work for most situations, and which should be your starting point when making situational setups. Ulfsild's Contingency, with the Shock, Lingering Torment, and Force combination on it, is your source of the Empower buff, which increases damage done by heavy attacks by 70%. Since Ulfsild's Contingency is a Mage's Guild skill, it will trigger the Might of the Guild passive, which grants you Empower for 10 seconds. It also deals decent damage on AoE and grants you the Minor Force buff, increasing your critical damage by 10%. Ulfsild's Contingency is delayed until the next skill cast, but whenever it's needed, you can activate it early by bashing your enemy. If you cast this ability as you're finishing your heavy attack, the Empower you gain from it will start working just in time to boost the final tick of that heavy attack you just finished. Use Scalding Rune instead, if you don't have access to scribing. Concealed Weapon is an ability that applies off balance when used against flanked enemies. Off balance increases enemies' damage taken from heavy attacks by 70% and lasts 7 seconds, after which it can't be applied for 15 seconds. The skill is also necessary to proc passives of the Assassination skill line. It's double barred, so that you retain the passive Minor Expedition buff, even if you change the front bar Concealed Weapon to something else. Next we have Summon Volatile Familiar, an ability that summons a pet, which can be reactivated to deal damage on an AoE around this pet for 20 seconds. Next we have Summon Twilight Matriarch, an ability that summons a pet, which can also be reactivated to heal 2 friendly targets. Banner Bearer with the Magic, Cavalier's Charge and Berserk combination on it, increases your magical damage done by 6%, grants weapon damage based on your movement speed, and grants Minor Berserk. You can change Berserk script to Heroism, if you can rely on your healer to provide the Minor Berserk buff. Use Barb Trap instead, if you don't have access to scribing. Power Overload is an ultimate that turns your heavy attacks into a powerful channeled AoE attack that drains 21 ultimate per tick. Use it only while enemies are debuffed if off balance. Bound Aegis is an ability that will passively increase your max magicka by 8%. It will also grant you Minor Resolve and Minor Protection, increasing your survivability. Relentless Focus is an ability that will passively grant you 400 weapon and spell damage. So that was the base setup, but now I'm gonna show you a bunch of situational skills, which you can use to tailor this base setup to specific fights. Banner Bearer is the first skill that has to go when you need to slot something situational, unless the situational skill specifically says that it's replacing something else. Elemental Blockade is another source of a balance for fights where you can't flank your enemies. It requires enemies to be concussed, so you'll have to use Shock Enchant to proc it, or rely on your teammates for that. Next we have Elemental Susceptibility. Use it as your source of major breach, whenever you're assigned to mechanics that separate you from your group, like for example Portal in the Navintas fight, Reef Hearts in the Reef Guardian fight, Bridge in the Teleria fight, etc. Then we have Summon Twilight Tormentor. This morph deals a bit more damage than the Summon Twilight Matriarch morph, but you lose access to the heal. It is an option depending on what you're trying to achieve. Use it if you don't mind sacrificing a backup heal for a bit more damage. Killer's Blade is a replacement for Concealed Weapon when off balance is being taken care of by someone else. Now let me show you a bunch of examples of how your final setup could look after you apply these situational skills to your base setup. This is a setup for dungeons. Nothing changes from the regular setup, but if you have a competent healer, you don't need to proc off balance yourself with Concealed Weapon, and can use Killer's Blade in that slot instead. This is a setup for 12-man trials. Concealed Weapon changes to Killer's Blade, because in a trial group, off balance should be provided by your healers. But make sure to swap it back to Concealed Weapon if for whatever reason your supports aren't doing their job. Summon Twilight Matriarch changes to Summon Twilight Tormentor, because it's way less likely you have to use any backup heals in a group with 2 healers. Keep in mind that Summon Twilight Matriarch is still an option if you need a self-heal. For example, when doing some portal mechanic where you're being separated from the rest of your group, or when you straight up can't rely on your healers. And this is a setup for parsing on the practice dummy, which is basically the same as the trial setup. Concealed Weapon changes to Killer's Blade because the practice dummy applies off balance to itself on its own, and Summon Twilight Matriarch changes to Summon Twilight Tormentor because you will never need to heal yourself when fighting a practice dummy. Now as for rotation, I don't use a static rotation, so this is just a list of priorities. Simply recast abilities when they run out, and follow the list of priorities when there are multiple things to refresh. Use Ulfsild's Contingency if your Empower is out, or if it's going to run out by the end of the heavy attack you're channeling. Also, make sure to recast it around 3 to 4 seconds before off-balance immunity ends. If off-balance immunity has ended, or is about to end, and you have more than 126 ultimate, activate Power Overload. If no supports are providing off-balance, use Concealed Weapon to proc it. Channel Power Overload until off-balance ends. Use Volatile Familiar. If enemy is above 50% HP, use Twilight Tormentor, if you're using that morph. And use Ulfsild's Contingency. Keep in mind that you can pre-buff Ulfsild's Contingency, summon Volatile Familiar, and summon Twilight Tormentor before entering combat. Now as for passives. I am now very quickly going through all of the passives you should get on the screen. You can either pause the video or look up this list on the website guide. Now moving on to gear. This is the default setup. So Unhallowed Torment, Surgeon's Mail, Rakkhat's Voidmantle Mythic, and One Piece Slime Crow. When choosing different situational sets, you can replace Unhallowed Torment. Surgeon's Mail and Rakkhat's Voidmantle are too strong and too crucial for this build to ever be replaced. Ideally, you want your second 5-piece set to be medium weight, but choosing a light set is also an option, if none of your group members are providing any penetration. This is a list of very useful situational sets. Susan's Torment is the best set for trash packs, and for bosses that regularly spawn smaller adds. Highland Sentinel is the strongest set if you're able to stand still in a certain encounter. Roar of Alkosh is a support set that allows you to provide 6000 penetration for your team, as long as they provide you with at least one synergy every 10 seconds. It's extremely beneficial to have at least one Alkosh user in groups. If your team isn't providing any penetration, your two most efficient options for getting it yourself are Alkosh and the Light Armor Concentration passive. And you'll get similar DPS with Alkosh, even though it's a support set, because medium armor passives are just that good. And then we have Noble Duelist, the best option if you can't rely on your team to provide penetration, and they're not providing you with synergies, which means you can't use Alkosh. Now this is a list of alternative gear, which might be easier to obtain, and can be used before you obtain the best gear. Keep in mind that dungeon gear isn't always an upgrade over crafted or overland gear. It's listed in case you already own some of it. Deadly Strike is the strongest set out of these. And one more reminder about gear, remember to replace your Flame enchant with Shock enchant when you want to use Elemental Blockade as your source of balance. Moving on to champion points. In the blue tree you want to use Weapons Expert, which increases light and heavy attack damage by 20%, Biting Aura, which increases AoE damage by 6%, Master at Arms, which increases direct damage by 6%, and Exploiter, which increases damage against off-balance enemies by 10%. In the red tree, you want to use Bond's Vitality, which increases your max health by 1400, Fortified, which increases your armor by 1731, Celerity, which increases your movement speed by 10%, and Rejuvenation, which increases all of your recoveries by 90. Moving on to race. The difference between best and worst race is about 5% of DPS. And there is no content in the entire game that you'll be blocked from completing because of choosing a bad race. With that said, the best races for 12-man content are High Elf and Dark Elf. The best race for 4-man content is Khajiit. Other decent options are Orc and Breton. Moving on to Mundus. Most of the time, you should use the 5th Mundus, which increases your critical chance. The Lover is an option if your group isn't providing any penetration, and you don't own any of the penetration sets, but you will always do more damage with a penetration set, like Roar of Alkosh or Noble Duelist, combined with the 5th, than with a damage set, like Unsouled Torment or Deadly Strike, combined with the Lover. As for attributes, it's extremely simple. You should always put all 64 points into magicka. Moving on to food. Most of the time, you should use the Arteon Pickled Fish Bowl, which increases your max health and max magicka. Solitude Salmon Millet Soup is a cheaper alternative. For dummy parsing, you can use Tomato Garlic Chutney, which gives you only max magicka. Moving on to potions. Use the Spell Power potions. They'll provide major sorcery and major prophecy, which are crucial buffs. You can craft them by combining Lady's Smoke, Namira's Rot, and Cornflower. Moving on to Parse. The best Parse I've achieved on a trial dummy was 138k, and it was utilizing the Highland Sentinel situational set. If we use the default gear setup, which uses Unsoul instead of Highland, it can still parse even 132k. Now, here's a recording of the 138k parse. And that's it for this video. If you have any more questions, you can comment down below or join our Discord server Wildheart. As always, feedback will be appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and check out my Twitch. Thanks for watching and see you next time.